the people try to enjoy the feeling if he measures to be an authentic man. You know, do that. His very first test did it. Because he accepted his new ministry. The ministry, now he's moving out of just being a man into the mission he was called in. And you see it there in Matthew 4. And the very first thing that God does to prepare him for that mission, he sends him out in the wilderness for 40 days without food. And in that he becomes intensely hungry and tired. And then he's tempted by the enemy. So all his feelings are calling him to satisfy his basic desires. And so the enemy comes in that weakened condition and he says, hey, you can turn these stones into bread. Why don't you do that? Now, that sounds like a simple request, but listen, after 40 days without food, it is so easy to go, yeah, I need to do that. I'm hungry. I deserve to eat. I'm starving. And yet, part of the mission there was to wait on God. And so, Jesus said, well, man can't live by bread alone. He lives by the will of God. And then the enemy tempts him and says, because Jesus knows that part of the mission is to accomplish this work to reclaim a lost world. And he says, and Satan says to him, I'll give you the world. All you have to do is bow down and worship me. We can end this thing right now. You can be comforted. I can encourage you. You can satisfy all these desires that are not being met in this moment, and you can have it all. And Jesus shows his authentic manhood by standing in the face of that temptation saying, no, I'll wait. Now I tell you that, guys, because your greatest enemy, you can write it down the rest of your life, to accepting these responsibilities, to leading courageously, to rejecting passivity, to turning off the TV and getting up and investing yourself in a directed way in your family is going to be to say no to a feeling. No to a feeling. Because men have to live above feelings many, many times every day in order to be an authentic man. You know, Ralph Waldo Emerson made this statement: nothing can bring a man peace but the triumph of principles. And I want you to know, nothing can bring a man the deepest satisfactions of his masculinity than the triumph of truth in his life. Not the satisfying of a feeling. That's kind of like candy. It tastes good for a moment, but then it leaves you empty and starved in just a short period of time, not truly satisfied. This is part of manhood. The first Adam abandoned his post of leadership. The second Adam chose to lead courageously. And then finally, this fourth defining difference. The first Adam sought a greater reward. The second Adam expected a greater reward. There's a difference between those two. Remember, the first Adam was not satisfied with the life God was promising him. He thought, unfortunately, that he was going to beat God's best for him. And guys, look at me. You will never, ever beat what God already wants to give you. He's got a great life for you. All He wants you to do is follow Him and get it. But this first Adam thought, no, I can beat that. There's something better than that. And what he discovered is what every man since him has discovered as we try to gain something better than what God already wants to give us. And that's what it says in Proverbs 24:20. It says this: for there will be no future for the evil man. We may try to get it, but we won't like it when we get it because it's not going to be as good as God had for us already. That's what he discovered. The second Adam, on the other hand, knew if he stayed the course, he would get God's best. In fact, there are numbers of examples of what I'm going to call in your outline, second Adam living, beginning with Jesus himself. Because all through the Scriptures keep telling us, keep encouraging us, give us examples of men who believed God over a period of time and got the best in life. That's how they stayed the course. Jesus being our primary example. Here's what it says in Hebrews 12:1 and 2. Just look at the verse. Let me mention one thing to you. It says, and let us run the race with endurance that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of the faith. who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and then he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God, that is, in glory. Now look at the verse for a minute. How did Jesus endure the cross? How did Jesus despise the shame? How did Jesus make it through one of the most difficult times any man could ever enter into? How? It tells us in the verse. Because in the midst of that agony and seeming defeat, Jesus expected a greater reward. See the phrase? Because of the joy set before him. He looked through the difficulty of the moment and expected on the other side, this is going to lead to something noble and honorable and glorious. That's how he stayed the course. And this is just not for the Son of Man. You may say, well, that's Jesus. No, there are other guys here in Scripture that we can look at. For instance, here's what David said. He said, I would have despaired. This is the king. He said, I would have despaired of life had I not believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in this life, the land of the living. In other words, what David is saying is, hey, I want you all to know through this psalm, I didn't follow after God for nothing. I knew there was gain in this. And so in the midst of hard times, rather than despair, I knew there would be something good before me in the land of the living. And that's what I kept my eyes on. It was the same with Moses. Look what it says of Moses in Hebrews chapter 11. It says this, by faith Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. And you go, how could he do that? Here's how he did it. Because he considered the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. As grand as Egypt was in that moment, he didn't cave into the feelings of seduction that constantly implored him to give in. No, he looked beyond that to a greater reward. And he lived his life in light of that. And then finally, in 2 Timothy, Paul says this about himself. He says, I have fought the good fight, I've finished the course, I've kept the faith, and in the future there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to one, but also to all who love his appearing. I can stay the course. I can fight the good fight. Why? Because I'm expecting the greater reward. All through the Scriptures, there are examples like that and also exhortations to that same end. For instance, in 1 Timothy 4:8, it says this, for bodily discipline is only of little profit, but godliness is profitable for all things, since it holds promise, not just for the present life, but also for the life to come. There's reward in this. You've got to believe there's reward in it. My favorite one of all, though, is Hebrews 11:6. Here's what it says. And without faith, it's impossible to please Him. For anyone who comes to God, who wants to be a real man, must believe that He is, but it's not just he has to believe in the existence of God. No, he's also got to believe that He is a rewarder of those who seek Him, who stay after Him. You've got to expect the greater reward. There will be moments, whether it's working with your children or holding up your integrity in the workplace, spending time with a child or thinking creatively to encourage another man. Those things of giving your life away like that have to have within them, embedded within them, the expectation that in this is reward, and then to believe God for it. Years ago, as a college student, after becoming a young Christian, I had to look at my circumstances around me with, as I mentioned to you earlier in this year, a crumbling family, an alcoholic dad. I'd just been injured in football, had to give it up. There was despair there, wasn't doing good in school. And in the rubble of those kind of things, where life had kind of caved in on me, as a young Christian, I had to decide whether I was going to live for Christ. And one of the things that I held on to in those early days as a young man, with all that around me, and some of you right now are in that kind of rubble. Your life is kind of caved in. And I know what that feels like. I've been there. And so a conclusion has to be made, whether I'm going to give into this, give into the feelings, play the victim, blame others, and just kind of, wallow my way through the next few years and hope something good happens to me. Or even worse, decide I'm going to seize evil and get my own reward. You've got that choice. And all I can tell you is at that moment I made a decision. And the decision was to believe God. And there was nothing around me to encourage me for that. Just believe God and His promise that there was a greater reward there if I would choose a nobler life. Well, that was then. That was at 18. I'm 53. And now I'm looking back and I'm going to say to you, has there been reward? And here's what I would say. I go, well, I've dealt with the wounds in my life over the last number of years responsibly, and I don't feel tied to my past at all anymore. I don't even think about it. I feel released and healed. That's a reward. I look at my marriage of 32 years, and I look at my wife who admires me. In fact, she's up in Fayetteville today, but I got up this morning because she left early yesterday, and when I got up this morning, on our mirror was this sticky note with this big happy face saying, "Remember, I love you." And I look at that and I think, my wife really does love me. There's great admiration there. Admiration that really I don't think I deserve. But when I look in her face and see admiration after 32 years, I go, that's a reward. I look at my kids who are reasonably healthy and emotionally stable, and I go, that's a reward. I look at the fact that I have a cause in life. I enjoy getting up in the morning, even on mornings like this that are real early, and coming in and pouring my heart out to guys like you and encouraging guys to hang in there. And I do so not because it's work. It's a joy. It's my cause. And I love that. That's part of my reward. I've had a host of great experiences over my lifetime. I look back over the season of my life since becoming a Christian and all the incredible things that have happened, not just to me, but around me. And I go, this is reward. And then on top of that, I look at the fact that because of trusting Christ, over the last 30-something years, there's not been any major dead ends that I've hit because of foolishness that I've had to spend additional years trying to recover from. And that in itself is reward. So is there a reward out there? And not only that, but there is also this greater expectation that one day after this life is over, there'll be additional reward for having made decisions that you never saw and you never will see, but God saw. And He says, I'll never forget those. In fact, I'll bring those up someday so you can hear them. All of that is reward. That's what Jesus promised when He walked the earth as the ultimate man. And He said to humanity, I've come that you might have life and have it abundantly. That's the call. The call is to real manhood. So let's sum all of that up and let's ask the question, so what is a real man cut from the biblical mold? Now we're at the point of me delivering finally the promise I made to you. What is a real man? Okay, here it is. If you want a succinct definition that you can carry with you, a real man is one who rejects passivity. He stops just standing there. He's one who accepts responsibility for God's will, for God's work, for God's woman. He's one who leads courageously. He becomes a life giver because he chooses to be, and he asks God to help him to be. And ultimately, he becomes that to others around him. And the whole time he's doing these things, he's expecting the greater reward, God's reward. I remember years ago when my son Garrett was just a teenager. He's 14. And he and I had talked about this definition. I'd encouraged it, and he holds me accountable to it. I hold him accountable to it. But he was out with a group of his peers and one of our youth pastors. who hadn't been through men's fraternity, and they were just out having a little session together, and the youth pastor said, "Hey, let me ask you guys a question. Who can tell me what a man is?" And everybody just sat there quiet, except Garrett, and he was in the back going. And finally the youth pastor said, "Garrett, you seem to know. What's a man?" And Garrett said, "A real man is one who rejects passivity, accepts responsibility, leads courageously, and expects the greater reward, God's reward." The pastor stepped back and said, "Man, where'd you get that?" And he said, "From my dad." And men, that's the way it ought to be.